So as I slowly get this series out about building a gaming rig and PC gaming in general, I thought it was important to get a video out about what my old gaming rig was because it was not the flashy setup that a lot of people see. It looks nothing like what I have built now, but it did an excellent job. And there were only a few reasons why it is. I couldn't keep using that machine. Otherwise, it would have probably still been viable today. Although not the best performance machine around, it's still doing what I needed to do. And just a quick little caveat to what this machine was capable of doing. It was running Helldivers 2 with no problem. I was running it at 60 FPS at 1080, so it had no problem there. I did have to get an SSD. That was a while back into things before Helldivers 2 was out in order to get the games to load fast enough to play. But all in all, the old machine I had worked really well. I will have pictures up of what that machine looked like. They're going to be stock images because I already have that machine packed away. I had kind of had it in my head to do these videos um, once I was getting the new machine built, but stuff did not line up. So that machine's packed away. I still have it. It still functions. It's just not going to work past a certain date because of the Windows 10 updates that will not be provided anymore at a certain point. I could fire it up now and probably enroll it into the extended support for free for the year that's out now. But anyway, beyond that, what did I have? I was running a Dell XPS 8300, and I've got some line notes here to read from, and I'll work some of this into the video someplace for the specs, so you can see those and pause and see them whenever. And again, I'll have pictures up, but basically it was a stock Dell machine that I got. The way I got this machine was I didn't have any money for a newer gaming computer or a computer in general, and I needed one. The last machine I had was a custom build that I want to say when I built that machine was Windows XP, and it lasted up through I think Windows 7 is where I finally had it. And then it was done. It was not performing well anymore. It had reached the maximum of its life. And that machine was built, I think, back in like 2000, around that time. So it lasted for a while. I don't know the specific date on that because I didn't keep track of that one. But the machine I'm going to talk about now, the machine I moved away from in February of 2025 this year, was a Dell, because I love Dell machines. Dell was making good machines at the time that just lasted. They had excellent warranty support. A lot has changed. I don't know that I would do this again. Having said that, you can build some great 1080p 60 FPS gaming rigs, even 120 FPS, off of Dell hardware. It's fully possible. It just depends on how you're getting that hardware. Maybe you're on Craigslist and you see a machine that's used, that may be viable, or you're at the Dell outlet. Dell outlet sells used machines, so the price has crept up there. It's not really viable there, in my opinion, anymore. Because if you're going to spend $1,000 to $2,000 on a workstation for gaming or anything, you're probably better off building it yourself, just because the warranty isn't going to make it worth it necessarily, in my opinion, because that's the only kind of boost there was. If there's not a cost savings, it's the warranty, right? But that doesn't really fit anymore. So what was the price point? That machine was I think it was $990 something after tax, because while the XPS 8300 debuted in 2011, it got a few revisions, and it got price reductions over time. That just happens. I got mine in 2013. And it was pretty much stock as it was. Now, I got about 12 years out of that machine is what I got, 2013 to 2025, around that. I got my time out of that machine, and I got it to do a lot. There were minor upgrades I did after a while. Obviously, that machine came with no good graphics card. It was just an XPS 8300, but where prices were for GPUs at that time, it wasn't that bad to get a card that did a little bit more. Also, requirements for stuff were a lot different. So it was a good all-around machine to work with. I had worked with XPSs before. I liked them. They did a good job of being good performers for the price point, depending on when and where you're getting them. And if I didn't mention it before, I sold my stepdad's RV for him, and he said he would buy me a machine out of that, and that's was kind of the best deal I had at the time, because I had no cash on hand to really do much else. I could buy parts, but building a machine was a little bit out of reach at the time. I probably could have put it off and bought it. Back in 2013, pricing was a little bit different, and it was a little bit easier to get a hold of a machine. Um, so also the form factor on this. The XPS 8300 is a micro ATX. It is a small machine. It is compacted. It is just bunched in there. So expansion is not really, high up there. If I'm going to build a machine for somebody that's just doing gaming, and I know that all we're going to have to do is swap out a GPU later on and maybe work with swapping out some hard drives, micro ATX would be fine. But I do video editing. I do a lot of more advanced tasks rather than just gaming. So I find myself in a position where I want hardware expandability to a larger degree than someone that may want to get into streaming if they're just gaming at one point. That's an easier transition. It always will be, just because the base hardware you need is just there. You might have to put an add-in card if you're doing, TV capture. If you're not going to use an external like USB solution, then you're going to want some extra ports for expansion. But a micro ATX board is going to have less ports in a lot of cases, but it can also be more cost effective too if you consider that. So I'll also have a picture of the board the XPS 8300 came up with, because you'll see what I'm dealing with. So what did that come with? What did I get back in 2013? So it came with, what I got came with an Intel Core i7 2600 processor. It was a quad core, 3.4 gigahertz, to 3.8 with boost, 4 core, 8 thread, and the TDP on that was 95. So TDP was kind of up there, considering there are processors now that are, a little under that 95 or a little above and performing so much better. Just kind of a look at how well hardware has aged over time. And then the power supply that came with that stock, Dell has these slim down power supplies they do. You don't always get these mass power supplies. It was a 460 watt PSU. Now, this later had to be upgraded to fit better graphics cards, but at the time, it worked for what I needed. So let's get into that. Also, this machine came with, I think, 16 gigs RAM, because again, it was an XPS and this was back in 2013. Getting a machine now without 32 gigs RAM, people would laugh at that. Like 32's kind of become the standard. Also to note, the stock power supply, and this is the case for a lot of Dell machines that are just their desktops, like Inspiron, Optiplex, stuff like that. They don't have the extra cables for power to your graphics card, so you would have to upgrade the PSU at some point anyway. I've never had any problems with the Dell PSUs, and anything that would have come up warranty covers, and they ship it out like same day. I've always had good luck with Dell, but I've been a technician myself, so I generally know how to work with tech support, Dell tech support, to get the parts that I need right away. So one of the first upgrades I did was getting a graphics card in, right? Because before, it just had the CPU working for graphics processing, right? So that was immediately going to be a no-go, because that i7 was not going to run the majority of titles I wanted it to at the time through that. So the first card I got was an EVGA GeForce GT640. That was a 4 gig GDDR3 single slot dual DVI and micro HDMI graphics card is what I got. That card did well for a while. But what ended up happening with that card, the fans ended up dying on it. They were not very good fans, in my opinion, because they just gave out fairly quickly. But I think it was 2 years I had that, and then the card gave out. I may be wrong on the timeline because I can't quite remember. But that card eventually overheated while I was live streaming Dying Light. It died. I could smell the ozone coming from the machine. I heard a whistle and a pop is what I heard. And then, oddly enough, the computer was still running, but there was no video output. So the stream was cut short immediately, and then I realized I had to pull that card. Luckily, there was graphics processing through the board, because most Dells are set up for that, and I was able to get basic video functionality to one monitor to be able to get things back up and running just for viewing stuff until I get a replacement card. So I ended up ordering, it was longer than 2 years. I apologize. I got the date here. So it was 2018 that died. So I had that EVGA GeForce GT640 from 2013 till 2018. So that card did give me good service, but the fans were always weird on that. Anyway, so 2018 rolls along. That happened where the card died, and I replaced it with a GTX 1050 Ti SC Gaming. That was a 4 gig GDDR5 card. Now, that one took up 2 slots on the board, and it was a beefier card. It improved the quality of life on my machine significantly. One, while frame rates weren't an issue, I never really had an issue with frame rates. Textures were a problem. I had to kind of turn some stuff down on games that were coming out closer in 2018, because the old card wouldn't have handled that. And I'm forgetting titles now, but when I got this newer card, it had the faster RAM, still the same 4 gigs, but it was faster on that, right? Because it's GDDR5 from the GDDR3. So a little bit better response time. Plus, the 1050 Ti was a beast of a card at the time. Like, that was something to have. And I was lucky to have got one. I forget the price I paid for that. It wasn't too expensive. And then I kept that card for a while. But around 2023, so, 2 years ago, this machine's still kicking, but games demanded a little bit more. Now, I spent for a used card, and I think the reason was the pixel shading was a problem, or one of the other features on that old, that EVGA GeForce card, that GTX 1050. I think the problem was one of the games I wanted to play, I think it was Helldivers. Helldivers 2, I mean, would not run on that card. Not well, anyway. So I ended up spending $75 to buy a used card, which was a where to go here, a Zotac GeForce GTX 1070 Ti. So 1070 up. I'm not going to list all the specs here for that. It was an 8 gig GDDR5 card, so more VRAM. That might have been the issue, was VRAM. I can't remember exactly what it was. I just know it was not working with Helldivers 2 that well at all. I had to do some work to that card. $75 wasn't bad. Cards were becoming hard to find at that point, especially that would work with the XPS 8300. So if you're watching this and you have an XPS 8300, God knows why you still would, but let's say you are and you're doing some of the weird funky stuff to make Windows 11 work on that machine, a 1070 will work on that board just fine. I got it to work no problem. There is a weird boot issue, but that is something you can fix. There's a BIOS update that did come out, like the final update that allowed you to do some stuff to get that working. So I did get that to work. I was worried it would not work. I did have to get a bigger power supply because you need at least 500 watts for the 1070, but that kept games running well. In fact, that card did not get full utilization because of the fact the CPU was bottlenecking that card. So, and there wasn't much else I could do. I could have got the i9 at the time, but the price on the i9 for, that Intel Core was not going to be worth it. It was not going to give me enough uplift to matter too much to me, so I didn't bother with that. If that's something that you felt you needed to do, then go ahead. But for the heat output, the power consumption, and the boost it would have given me, it just wasn't worth it to me at that time, and I probably still would not upgrade to the i9. I don't think that's something that I would see as viable. So, the card, had pretty good outputs, nothing too fancy in there. It worked for what I needed. The card was longer than the others, so it ate up most of the width of the XPS 8300. So you'll see in the images I posted prior, you can see there that there's not a lot of room to work with. It is a micro ATX case, and because it's a Dell case, they don't give you a lot of room to work with. So that card butted up really close against the hard drive cage in there, but it worked. It did work. Airflow was not because the Dell cases are pretty cramped. It was not giving me the airflow that I would necessarily want, but I never had overheat issues with that. Even the old card that burned up was not an airflow issue. The fan died on that card, and that's ultimately what killed it. So that could have been fault to me. Maybe I didn't maintenance the fans properly, or I don't remember actually ever opening the fans on that one and re-oiling those bearings or anything, or doing any maintenance to it. If it needed the oil bearing, I can't remember at this point, but I didn't do any maintenance to that. So, the 1070 is 211 millimeters. So it's pretty long card for a micro ATX. For an ATX case, it's nothing. It'll handle no problem. So, the RAM that I had on this XPS 8300 was the stock came with, which was the 16 gigs of DDR3 RAM. DDR3, so that's how old this was, and it was still kicking though. Now I did upgrade it to 32 gigs of DDR RAM later on. Unfortunately, I was only able to get 4 sticks. So, 4 sticks to fill in there because of price of getting DDR3 plus capacity limitations at the time. I wasn't finding what I needed anywhere that I could really afford to buy, and I didn't want to. So 32 did good though. That lasted for a while. Again, back when this machine was out, 16 was enough. So 32 was a pretty good boost. Even with the games I was running, it was still doing pretty good. Now at this time I was running this machine, I was still running a lot of titles off the Xbox, but I did have a lot of stuff in Steam. But like 99% of my Steam library, even today, is games that would run on, a potato. That's probably what the title of this video will be too, is my gaming potato, a look into my gaming potato. Because a lot of the games I played don't require a lot. Helldivers 2 was a title that was one of the more extreme titles. And at that, what I needed to get it to run was an SSD and not an NVMe. We're talking the SSDs in the 3.5, format, like laptop size hard drives. And that's what I ended up putting in for my primary drive to get Windows 10 to load faster. And then I ended up getting a 1 terabyte drive like that for my secondary for games that needed the boost. For the longest time though, I've always ran an 8 terabyte no less than a 4 terabyte mechanical hard drive for games, because a lot of the games in my Steam library are legacy titles or older titles that don't need fast storage and get very little uplift in terms of game load from having them over. Like, yeah, Skyrim, for example. Should I probably have Skyrim on an SSD for faster loading? Sure. Does it need it? Not really, because I don't mind waiting for it. So it's more of a personal choice, and it's space consumption, right? Like, how much space do I want to take up on the SSD over just a mechanical hard drive? Because mechanical hard drives, storage is cheap. A few games almost have to have an SSD to make them bearable. So Helldivers 2, No Man's Sky was another one. No Man's Sky, I saw an immediate improvement in gameplay just having it on an SSD. So that's why I ended up getting an SSD added, just to play games like that. The old setup, I had 3 monitors. I've had 3 monitors for a while. The machine before the XPS, I had a dual monitor setup, and then I found that I needed a 3rd monitor just because I was using more. And I was running 22-inch used Dell monitors at that point. So 1080p, 60 hertz, that's all they were. That's all of them. I still have 2 of those on either side of me, but when I upgraded, I got a bigger 27-inch monitor. It's a 1080 locked monitor, though, but I got it cheap. I got it for like $100. So, I'll do other videos talking about the 1080p gaming portion, because I feel it's a topic it needs a little more conversation into. But right now, this is just kind of looking at what I had, what it did, what it was capable of doing. Fortnite, it used to run well, and then Epic did an update. I forget when it was, but it was kind of an overhaul to how Fortnite ran, and that's when the game stopped running on the 1070. It just would not handle anything anymore, and it was having a hard time hitting 60 FPS. It was having a hard time even getting to 30 FPS. It became just unplayable. So Fortnite became the first title I was not able to play that I could play before. Now, to clarify, this machine was never intended to run a game like Cyberpunk. And in my new build, I partially used the specs from Cyberpunk's minimum requirements and ultra requirements on doing a new build. I still have not played Cyberpunk. I feel that's the kind of comedy this whole thing is. I built a rig to play Cyberpunk, and I still have not played Cyberpunk. Hasn't happened. So yeah, my expectation of this old machine, it was 1080p 60 hertz. It was essentially a console replacement. It was doing all the way up to Xbox One titles. It was running those fine, with the exception obviously of Fortnite. I'm sure if I would have spent a few more hours configuring settings for Fortnite, I could have got it to run, but I just decided it was easier just to run through the console still until I got a viable computer replacement. But one title out of a bunch not running that I actively play, that wasn't a loss for me. It wasn't a big issue. I did eventually add a PCI USB 3.0 card, because this Dell, the XPS 8300 did not come with USB 3.0 ports. It had USB 2.0, and that was a problem because doing video editing, having external hard drives, I still carry a lot of external hard drives, it just was not fast enough to be able to handle the external devices. It was doing okay with the internal stuff, but again, those were older SATA connectors inside, so that could have been an issue. I did add an expansion to the front of the case because it did have a 3.5 floppy cutout that I wasn't using, and I ended up, when I got the USB 3.0 PCI card, I added in a front panel option, and I populated it. So I had USB 3.0, 2 ports on the front, and then 4 USB 3.0 on the back. And that served me well for a long time. I never had any issues there. Not a problem at all. Because there weren't a lot of USB ports on this machine. I had to have a USB hub a while back, and I just decided it'd be better if I put an add-in card for drives and stuff anyway. So the issues, why did I switch away from this machine? What was the whole point of upgrading? Well, one was, with Windows 10 ever looming on no longer being viable because of Microsoft discontinuing support for it, even though they've been very wishy-washy and back and forth on whether they want to continue support or not, I decided I needed to figure out something to get moved forward. So I started speccing a machine out, starting to get that done. Secondarily, as I talked before, the GPU was being wasted. It was being bottlenecked by the CPU. It was just being bottlenecked. I fully could have taken that 1070 and put it into this new build that I did, but I wanted to get a more modern card, and that's kind of where the decision was made there. I still have that old card. It's a fallback. I could use that as a backup in case something goes wrong. Yes, there will be a performance hit, but it's better than nothing until I get a different card, especially with prices where they're at. I'm recording this video in October of 2025, and if you know what GPU prices look like right now, it's not great. So, and then again, it had no USB 3.0 connectivity natively, so I had to eat up an add-in slot to get that, and that's not horrible. It's just I'd rather have a board that had it integrated than having to use an add-in card to do it. I'd rather do that instead. So those were the main issues why. Those are the only real issues I had as to why I need to upgrade this machine. And primarily with not running Windows 10, the XPS 8300 does not have TPM on it. So it is not technically upgradable. Yes, I know there are ways, and I'm going to lightly touch on that here, which is I know there are ways, but having a technical background and seeing what happens when you just try to make things work, while that's fun when it's a hobby, when it's your primary machine and you need it to work, the last thing you want is to have your machine not functioning because Microsoft has made a change to that where your workaround no longer works, because people did have that happen, and I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to be scrambling trying to find a solution to getting Windows 11 to work on a non-TPM compliant machine. We can go back and forth all day about the fight the man, screw the system, all that, but at the end of the day, I need a machine that just works, and I don't want to have to be messing around with all these things. Other comments would probably be something to the degree like, why didn't I just run Linux on this machine? Sure, but the way that games run under Linux is a pain. I know there are some enthusiast channels out there that are claiming that it's working so much better and it's not that bad anymore, but it's still bad enough that even me with a technical background, at the end of the day, I don't want to spend the energy trying to make Linux work with games when I can just run them on Windows. And yes, I understand the privacy concerns, I get that. But keep in mind, this video series and the things I'm talking about are coming from two main perspectives. Someone who was a technician that on a daily basis got to see people having issues with workstations and understanding what the common user has to deal with, both office settings and in gaming settings, what they want to work, how simply to make that work. And then also coming from the perspective, I'm a technician, and while I understand, yes, I can make these things work, how much additional effort is going to have to go into making those things work? I want a simple enough solution and a common sense solution that just functions for, in this case, wanting to be able to play games on a computer. So that's kind of the all in all of what the old machine was. And I hope that shows you on there that you don't have to buy really expensive hardware. I'm going to be making some other videos here talking about gaming rig builds, PC builds and stuff, but if you get nothing else from what I'm talking about, I want you to understand a couple of points. One, you do not have to spend necessarily $2,000 on a gaming rig right now to be able to play modern games. You need to instead be looking at what you can afford, what you can get your hands on, and what parts you can put in that to make it work. That should be your focus if you can't afford a whole new rig. Even if you have to buy a new rig, you're starting from scratch, don't try to max out. Buy over time. That is the beauty of being able to build a gaming PC. And I think that we need to get rid of the idea of just gaming rig. Any computer is a gaming rig. I know another channel has said this, but I'm not hearing it enough. Any computer is a gaming rig, okay? If we dumb that down to, can you play games on it? And the answer is yes, then you have a gaming rig. The question is, what games can you play and how high can those settings get? And that's why I'm pushing for a lot of people for your first build. Don't try to build a 4K machine. Focus on getting a 1080p machine that runs AAA titles, non-PvP at 60 FPS, and then look at trying to get PvP titles like Fortnite, Apex, stuff like that, getting those to be 1080p at 144 or a little bit higher. I think 144 is the highest on the refresh rate you would need. I have videos I'll be doing about that. I'm trying to get these out. I've just been very busy, but don't try to build a gaming rig to be this ultra machine that's going to last forever, because that's not going to happen. The new rig I built is a 10 to 15 year machine. And it will do that. I know it will do that because I know where things are at and I know where things are going to go for right now. That's what matters to me. Also, stop focusing on being able to play just the latest game out. There are a lot of other games out there you may have missed out on. Keep in mind that when you're building a gaming rig, it shouldn't just be able to play the game that is fresh and new right now. It should be able to handle that game plus everything back to at least the Atari. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you look at it in that scope, you're not just getting a decade's worth of games, you're getting the history of gaming. Add emulation on top of what you're doing, and you now have generation upon generation of console that you can run. Whether you're running an emulator in disk copies or whether you're getting your emulated games elsewhere, either way, you should be able to run those really long span. There are so many games that are not seeing remakes or ports at all that are just kind of lost to time, where emulation helps with that. So I would like you to keep that in mind, that you're not just building to play the top 5 games this year. You should also be wanting to look at older games in a preservation, essence. Like, I want to go back and play Resident Evil 1 on the PlayStation. You know, can you do that? And that should be an easy yes with the hardware you've got. And that you don't have to spend a lot. If you can afford to spend $2,000, I recommend setting your budget as $2,000 on your build and building based off of that. Obviously, right now it's hard because with GPU price and CPU price, that's kind of breaking the bank. Boards are really not exceptionally expensive right now, but GPU CPU is what's gonna get you higher up there. So even with that, you may be able to get about $2,000 in. I'm not going to go over specific builds necessarily. I'll go over what I built and explain what's in there and why, and talk about those things. Not this video, a different video, but I'm happy with what I've got. It has served me so well at this point, both in terms of video editing and everything else. I build kind of a generalist machine. I don't build gaming rigs. That's not what I built. I'm building a computer that's expandable and has multiple uses. And that's important because a lot of people will get into gaming on PC and then down the road maybe wanting to stream. Go, oh, I want to stream. And they realize they may not be able to because they got gaming specific hardware that for one reason or the other is not handling streaming. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but encoding video to stream out, you may not have what you need if you're just doing gaming. Right? Maybe your resources for your gaming portion are just enough to run a title like Cyberpunk, right? But then you find that as soon as you try to do game streaming, you have to dumb down your settings because you don't have enough resources to play Cyberpunk or a game like that and stream. I see a lot of that with people that run streams and they're having problems where they don't understand why the system's running. I even still have issues with games that I feel are maybe not optimized well. Vampire Survivors is a good example. I can play that game no problem, but for whatever reason, when I try to stream it, it looks like crap. And I know it's not my hardware, it's something with the game. So I don't know if there's optimization needs to be had there or what the deal is, but that's just a title I don't stream because it does not stream well. Now I can play it for like the Xbox and stream it over. It has performance issues on the Xbox at that point, but I'm streaming the game through an Elgato to the PC. So that the Elgato's doing the heavy lifting, not the PC. Anyway, that's a thing for another time. But yeah, you know, understand what you're building, why you're building it, and then know the limitations of. But I've seen a few channels on YouTube where they buy up Dells off of like Craigslist. The Dells are Windows 11 compliant, and then they upgrade them to run gaming, and those do absolutely fine. Again, if you are not a PvP person, like player versus player, you're not doing Fortnite, you're not doing Apex, you're just wanting to play single player games like the Resident Evil games, you're not doing competitive, you're just playing those cinematic titles, really, really do consider playing those games 1080 at 60 FPS. I know a lot of people scoff at that, but it's a good starting point. And ultimately, if you're on console right now and you're looking into getting a gaming PC, really just set yourself up to run a 1080 60p console replacement system. That would probably be the best thing to do to get you a start. You can always upgrade components later on. And as far as like sound and stuff, I've heard about that, just touching on this briefly. My machine has many fans because I don't use an AIO, I don't use a water cooler, but I wear headphones whenever I game. I don't hear that, and even on stream, fans have not been an issue. I have a noise canceling mic. It seems to do pretty well with that. So anyway, that's about all I've got on this one. I just wanted to touch on what my old machine was, what I was upgrading from, why I was upgrading from. If that machine didn't have the issues Windows 10 was going to be having, and some of the hardware limitations that I outlined, which was only three main issues why I was switching, I'd probably still be running that machine now. Because the upgrade that I got, the new build is nice to have. It is definitely nice to have. I love my new build. But I could have probably stuck with that machine for another 5 years, the old XPS, and probably been fine for a little bit longer. Does that mean I would have been cut out of some games? Yes, absolutely. But even now on my new rig, only 5 of the games I play are really requiring the newer hardware. Everything else, which I have over 500 titles in Steam, 5 out of that 500 something titles have to have the newer hardware. Everything else was still working. And even indie games, even indie newer games running fine. So anyway, hope that gives you some insight into kind of what to look for a gaming build, and, you know, how an old, you know, potato like that machine was, the XPS 8300, in the more final years of that machine, I used to call it my potato, how it still functioned. It still worked. It was still a good machine. It still did a number of things I needed it to do without problems. But it was getting to end of life, and I feel that getting even 12 years out of that machine was good. It was originally set up as a 10-year machine, and it more than did that. So keep that in mind, you guys. You don't have to get anything super fancy, and LED lights do not make the machine run faster. it's a nice to have for the looks, but even, you know, me at this age, I'm 40, I don't want the carnival colors coming out of my machine. I have my light set to Division Orange right now, and I've got the RAM doing a neat color effect, but I don't have anything crazy. The option's there, and that's something you can always upgrade to later on. But if you're needing to just get a gaming rig built to play games, it's something you can do in pieces or a step at a time fairly cheaply. So anyways, guys, I'll try to get some more of these videos out sooner. I've just been exceptionally busy. I do apologize. Do subscribe so you can get the updates when they come out. We're getting more content like this out at this point. You have questions, comments, whatnot, leave them below, and I'll respond to those. And, you know, if it's a big enough topic, I'll do a video on it. But at this point, the channel's not big enough that we're getting that much attention, but I want to get this content out there. So anyway, I hope that covers everything. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Any comments, leave them below, and we'll get to those. But that's where it's it for now, and we'll have another video out hopefully soonish here, going over another topic in the series of just, you want to build a gaming PC. So you want to build a gaming PC. I want to get this information out there because I feel like in the landscape of where YouTube's at and online, there's a lot of information out there, but a lot of people new to this may be very, very hesitant because they're not sure what they need, or may think they have to spend thousands of dollars over what they actually need to get a decent machine or even getting something off the ground to start working. And that's not the case. So anyways, guys, thanks again for checking out the video, and we'll be back with something very soon.